We want to continue our night tonight in our study from the Song of Songs and conclude that study tonight. I do very much appreciate the interest in the subject and your comments and your suggestions and questions. We have covered the text itself and done the best we can to explain it as we understand it. And we began last time sort of an epilogue looking at really what are the big picture lessons that we learn from this Song of Songs. What is the Song of Songs all about? And there are different answers to that. But the one that I think fits the best as far as the text is concerned is I believe this is God's message extolling the glory of romantic love as God designed it. It's the superlative song because it deals with the fundamental relationship among human beings. Man and a woman, two becoming one flesh. The marriage relationship as it should be, as God designed it. Not all the perversions and misuse of it that men have made in ancient times up to today. So what does the Song of Songs teach us about romantic love as God designed it? One thing we looked at last time, we'll just mention, is it is intended by God to be a mutual, exclusive relationship. I am my beloved and he is mine. That works. But the ideas that men have come up with, including Solomon, of polygamy, as we've said many times, a man with 1,000 wives doesn't know what a wife is. He doesn't know what a marriage is. He can write wise things, but he never experienced what God designed. And I think that's the reason maybe God used him. The wisest man that ever lived is confessing his ignorance about something so fundamental and such a blessing that God designed that men turn into a torture. As Solomon would write about his experience from his choices, there's hardly anything worse than that woman whose hands are nets and bands. It's a torturous relationship. Better to dwell on the rooftop than with a contentious woman. But that's not the way it has to be. It's not the way God designed it to be. For men and women, it's to be a blessing, and it is in a mutually exclusive relationship. A mutual and exclusive relationship, I should say. Another thing that I think we find that the song teaches is that it takes work. Isn't that something we've seen through the book? That this relationship between the Shulamite and her beloved came through effort. It came through tending, as it were, the garden of this relationship. It's required. We looked along at passages like chapter 2, when the beloved speaks to the Shulamite and says things like, well, the winter is past and gone, and the flowers appear on the earth. And you get the idea as you read that he's not just talking about a garden or about the season of the year, but in relationships there are winter times, and then there are times of opportunity in spring. And he goes on to say, let us take the little foxes that spoil the vineyard. I think he's more than talking about little furry critters, but he has in mind the idea of things that will destroy a relationship. Maybe we'll mention along some of the things that might fit in the category of those foxes that spoil the vineyard. At the last speech there in chapter 8 and in verse 7, many waters cannot quench love. There are always going to be barriers, enemies. There are going to be threats that are designed to destroy, to quench. They come from Satan ultimately, to destroy what God intends to be a glory. The text talks about mountains, doesn't it? Sometimes the mountains are mountains of delight, but sometimes, like for example in chapter 2, they are mountains of division. I think there's a figure of speech here to describe times when maybe a couple is separated, whether it be physically or emotionally. Those mountains have to be bridged. They have to be conquered. This loving relationship is not always easy. It's not easy to get up a mountain, but it's worth it. That's one lesson that we learn. I love this quote, so I share it with you. One commentator of the Interpreter's Bible, talking about this point, wrote, "The victory of love of which the Song of Songs sings has little to do with the sentimental platitude of minor poets. A lot of cheap talk about love, as if it's something easy, something that doesn't take effort. He makes the point their love is a hard-won thing that emerges victorious and triumphant in spite of everything that would hinder and prevent it. So the point is, don't let the world convince you that love's supposed to be easy. And that if you have any trouble, well, you're just in the wrong relationship. Just bail out of that and get you another one. That is not true. Hear me. That is not true. In the most compatible relationships, there are going to be things that have to be dealt with. There are going to be problems to be overcome. And I think the song reminds us of that. Many relationships fail. Not because some complicated thing was never discovered, but because simple things weren't dealt with. You probably have seen this book. You may have read it, The 5 Love Languages. This is Gary Chapman. It's an example of a number of books about relationships that are put out there. This book sold 1 jillion copies. Not a bad book, by the way. But when you read this book, what you find is that a lot of the principles that he talks about really are just Bible principles. And I think a fellow like Chapman, who's a religious guy, probably would acknowledge that. A lot of what he's talking about are Bible principles. And that is true. Be careful how you speak. Isn't that the scripture? Proverbs chapter 18 and in verse 34, or verse 28, 21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. So you got to be careful how you use your speech. In 12 and verse 25, the wise man wrote, heaviness in the heart of a man makes it stoop, but a good word makes it glad. You don't think speech has an impact? How you talk to your wife, your husband, has an impact? The tone of your voice, the words that you choose, are not talking. All these things have a power. Maybe that's some of those little foxes that spoil the vineyard, Feeling and expressing gratitude. Not being oblivious to things that are done and done for us. I've told this story several times, so forgive me. I know many of you have heard it many times. 40-something years ago, when before Don and I got married, I went to talk to the elders of the congregation where I grew up. They were both good men, had good marriages, and I asked them both for just give me something that a new husband, a fellow trying to learn, needs to especially remember. They could have said a lot of good things, but Brother Buchanan did not miss a beat when I asked him that question. He said, many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. He said, do not ever let your wife forget you appreciate her. Proverbs 31. Great advice. How many marriages have been harmed no little because either the husband or the wife just feels like nobody notices, nobody cares? It's awful. Have you ever had a job working for somebody that was a thankless job? You know how terrible that is? Even if you get paid okay, to never hear thank you, to never be noticed for the work that you do, to feel like you're just unappreciated. That's a burden to carry. Is that what those little foxes reckon? That's the kind of thing that Mr. Chapman will tell you about. Well, the Lord told us about that. The importance of forgiveness, and all the associates that go with it. Ephesians chapter 4 is not particularly a marriage passage. He deals with marriage, doesn't he, in this letter. But I don't think Ephesians 4 is in the particular context of marriage. It's in the idea of brethren getting along with each other. But boy, doesn't it apply. He says, 4 verse 31 is what I'm looking for. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor, that's the old word, clamor, the idea of loud yelling and talking, hollering at each other, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. How connected those words are. You can't really have one without the other. And you can't hold to one bad thing and not really ruin the whole. What great advice for marriage. All the bitterness, all the wrath, all the anger, all the yelling, all of the slanderous, unkind, unfair speech and thought, all the malice gone. And forgiveness in the forefront. What a great thought. And that takes work. It takes effort. It's not easy. It's not natural. It's a learned behavior. It's a choice applied. Humility. While we're here in Ephesians, how about Ephesians 4? This is a great passage to read at a marriage ceremony, even though it's not exclusive to marriage. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you were called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Does that apply to marriage? Can any marriage survive without that? Not really. Not as God would have it. All of that's involved in the work of a relationship. Never neglect your partner's greatest needs. Again, a lot of these marriage books, and again, some of them are quite good, but they will write and they will say that overwhelmingly men crave respect, and when they feel like their wife undercuts them, when they feel like that she does not respect them, when they feel like that their wife is talking down to, it just cuts them deep. And the wife may be oblivious to what she's doing. But the relationship has been damaged no little, and I don't know why he's mad. Think back. Maybe often that's one of the reasons why. On the other hand, as we said, here's a woman who just craves to be cherished and to not feel taken for granted. She wants to hear, I love you. She wants to see that in the way that you treat her, in the consideration you have for her. Now, marriage books that are good books will tell you that the Lord told us that. In this great section on the home here, look at the last verse of chapter 5, Ephesians 5. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself. And see the wife reverence her husband. There it is in one sentence. And all the applications of that. Young husband gets married and he just doesn't even think that his wife may have dinner on the table. He makes a decision to run off with the guys and do something. Doesn't even call. That's telling your wife you don't really love her, by the way, if you need help with that. And that's what she hears when she finds out what's going on. She's worried something happened to you. You might have got run over out in the street somewhere. And then she just finds out you didn't even bother to think about her. That's a lack of love. And when it comes to the reverence, when she's talking about her husband in an unflattering way, when she's working around what she knows is his will, he feels that disrespect. So, those little foxes can ruin the crop. The Lord told us that a long time ago. Let me mention something else the Song of Solomon, I think, helps us understand. And that is the relationship as God designed it is founded on purity, sexual, moral purity. It was the source of their attraction in many ways. We looked at this passage maybe last time we were talking about this from chapter 8. Here's this Shulamite, she grows up. She could be a door or a wall. I think we see what that's saying. She could be morally unchaste or morally pure. She said, I am a wall. And because of that, she said, then was I in his eyes as one that found favor. The kind of man that she was attracted to was a man who valued moral purity. That was a foundation of their relationship. Today, the world is so clueless. There are so many who will tell our young people that marrying a virgin, for example, is no big deal, doesn't matter how many partners you've had. In fact, that can be a good thing. Just go out and be loose morally and give yourself to just anybody, everybody, and then one of these days you'll be ready to settle down. And then you can be, that's just not the way it's designed to work. There are people who will tell you, it's because we respect marriage so much. That's why we tell couples to sleep together, live together, because we want to make sure we're compatible. We'll lower the divorce rate. Statistics show that people who make those choices have a higher divorce rate when they marry. That's a fact. And that shouldn't surprise us, because if that was best, that would have been what God would have prescribed. It's the opposite. The higher number of sexual encounters you've had and partners you've had, the less likely you are to ever have a happy relationship. These are not preachers telling us that. These are just people looking at the statistics. That women who married as virgins had the lowest divorce rate by far, statistically. This is not my illustration, but I heard it one time. It impressed me, and I'll share it with you if I haven't shared it with some of you already. There was a fellow, a Bible teacher, and he was at this young men's camp-like thing. And he was trying to talk about this subject along this line about purity and about the value of saving yourself for that one that's worthy of you. And so he pulled something sort of sneaky. The fellows were all sitting around him there, and so he went over there and grabbed this young man's arm that was sitting there unaware. And he had in his hand a little strip of, I don't know, would it be packing tape or duct tape, something really sticky. And sneakily, he grabbed that young man. He's sort of woolly like me, and so he grabbed that young man and slapped that tape, just rubbed it down like that real good. The young man's eyes got real big, and then after a second, he ripped that off and about half the hide. And the fellow just yelping, and he ran out the door, and while everybody was stunned, he grabbed the guy across from him, took that same piece of tape, put that on the guy's arm and rubbed it like that. And he ripped it off. It hurt. Wasn't quite as bad. I guess the other fellow's skin had blocked it some, And then, I don't know, this guy must have just been slow, because he grabbed him, third guy. Same piece of tape. Put it down on his arm and rubbed it. He pulled it off. It didn't hurt very much at all. And while the first guy was getting medical attention, he said to the fellas he had their attention at that point. He said, "Did you notice something about this little illustration here? Did you notice how that bond the second time, the third time just wasn't as strong? How many times can you be bound to a person and that bond not be diminished?" Now, I'm not suggesting that there are not some cases. For example, Ruth and Boaz, Ruth had been married before, hadn't she? She was widowed. I'm not saying that, for example, a marriage like that can't be good, but I'm just making a point that I think is valid. I'm saying when a young person engages in sexual behavior, which God designed, but He designed it in a context of two becoming one. Hear me. And that physical union involves a spiritual union. As two people are joined together in a special way. And where you have the world telling young men and young women to give that gift away just to anybody who pays attention to you. And there's no real meaning to it. We read a book last time we were talking from some worldly person about the diminishing of the sexual relationship. And that's what it is. When the world tells you that, having sex is just about like shaking hands, it doesn't mean anything, they don't know. They don't understand the one who made that relationship, made that to be a special effort and an action to draw two people together emotionally. When you give that away so cheaply, when young women give themselves that special gift away to someone that not serious about them, maybe just be outright using them. and they do that over and over and over again, they never will know the joy and the union and the closeness that God intended. I say that as a preventative. Don't let the world ever fool you or deceive you into thinking that it's not important. God wants two to be one, and that's a special gift that has a rightful place, and every other place is wrong and degrading and shameful. I think this book helps me understand that. Purity is a part of the picture as God designed it. And let me just offer this thought in passing, an important thought, I believe, for all of us. That purity extends beyond the sexual act. It starts with the mind. It starts with our speech. It starts with our habits, with our company. You know, the Lord said, it's what comes out of the man that defiles him. From within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornication. There are people who are corrupt in their actions because they're corrupt in their speech, because they're corrupt in their thoughts. And so, if we want to win this fight, we're going to have to start with the battle for pure thinking. That's also a Bible principle. Matthew 5 is a familiar passage to this audience. You've heard Jesus told his audience that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. I tell you, whosoever, this version says, looks or stares at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery in his heart. You have to learn the discipline of turning your eyes away, turning your mind away from things that are going to corrupt the purity that God wants for you, for your good, for my good. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 3. There must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity, no obscenity, no foolish talking, no coarse jesting. There's talk that leads or springs forth from dirty thought. And it's corrupting and corrosive as acid on young people who are wise enough to seek for purity. They want the full blessing of what God intends. They don't want a diminished product, something other than what God designed. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 3, the purpose of God for you is this, that you be holy and that you may keep yourselves from the desires of the flesh, and that every one of you may keep his body holy and in honor, not in the passion of evil desires like the Gentiles who have no knowledge of God. The world laughs at this. The world's lost. Keep the standard where God put it. It's high. And recognize the fact that there's always a blessing in doing it God's way, and there's always a price to pay when I don't. It's my choice. It's your choice. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 3, Peter says, you wasted enough time. You lived long enough by the world's standards, given up to the desires of the flesh, to loose behavior, as this translation puts it. It's so easy to fall into that. The problem of lust producing images, pornography is a common word for it, is absolutely out of control in our society. The young people here may not believe that you could not say a single curse word on television. There used to be censors that would not allow that. Any hint of sexuality was just not seen as fit. Sexuality is not bad, but the portrayal of it on television, the graphic kind of thing that you see commonly, not just in some R-rated movie, but just anything, any commercial. We gave up on purity and trying to have decency in our society a long time ago, and it's not gotten any better, and it will not get better. But now, it's right there on your phone. Our smartphone does not have, along with its intelligence, a sense of morals. And if we don't, we will be destroyed by it. I mean that literally. One fellow said it this way: pornography is easy, secretive, cheap, dangerous, ubiquitous, common, easy to find. This has been 4 or 5 years ago now. One fellow estimated that these big websites or operators of different websites worth and maybe doing nearly $100 billion in business. That's more than McDonald's. Selling pornography everywhere. It's easily accessible. And it's become a habit. Talked about, this was a survey in Western Europe, about an average of men averaging 70 minutes of online porn a week, some of them as much as 7 hours a week. You know, it doesn't have to be that way. This is all a choice. I think about Job. I think about how Job wrote toward the end of his speeches there. He'd been accused of all kinds of terrible things. He said, let me tell you something. I've made a covenant with my eyes that I will not look upon a young woman. That's what it takes. You don't have to do that. You can make up your mind that when maybe some image, maybe it's somebody who just absolutely is undressed, or maybe it's something else, some media outlet. Maybe it is the phone. You know, you can just turn away from that. You don't have to look at that. The problem is once you look at it, it's just like glue. It sticks in your mind, and even after it's gone, the problem is still there. And so making a covenant with your eyes, you're not going to look at things that are a stumbling block. You're not going to toy with things that are destructive. I can handle it. I can handle it. I'm not familiar with this man particularly. You may be. I don't know. His name is Terry Crews. He was an actor. Before that, I think he was an NFL football player. So this is a guy physically disciplined, tough. But he spoke rather candidly in an interview several years ago about the fact that at one point he had what he called an addiction to pornography. He said, people don't think you can be addicted. He said, I was. And he made this point in this, and I'm just giving you a little bit of what he said. He said, I tell you, it changes the way you think about people. People become objects. They become things to be used rather than people to be loved. As you read people talking about pornography in particular, it's just a lot like drug use. You know, when people take drugs, nobody. Gabe was talking about this morning about alcohol. Nobody ever took their first drink and said, man, I can't wait to be a drunk. I'd love to be an alcoholic. I can't wait to wake up in the gutter. Nobody. People do, though. You know how they got there? As he pointed out, it's that first drink. And then pretty soon that drink's drinking you. And then it's owning you. And people start out, they may accidentally just run across something. But they make the mistake David did. They don't turn away. They keep looking at that woman that doesn't belong to them. And then it leads to another step. And pretty soon they're someplace they never dreamed they'd be. They didn't intend to be. The point is you can't toy with this stuff. A couple of fellows wrote a book called Every Man's Battle. They wrote several books along that line. And they talk about case studies of individuals who have been damaged no little. The effects of today's escalated pornographic themes warp and pull at sexual horizons. It has become irrefutably clear that the internet doesn't reveal your sexual taste, it creates them. He talks about people who, as they go further and further, go deeper and deeper into more outrageous, outlandish kind of perverted images, violent images. I didn't put it up here, but you know, several years ago there was an interview with Ted Bundy. You remember that name? You'd have to be a certain age to remember it. But Bundy was a serial killer. Raped and killed, I don't know, maybe a score of women, maybe more. Horrible things. He was caught, he was convicted. Before he was put to death, he did an interview with, I think, James Dobson, the Protestant preacher, who's written some good books on the family. Anyway, and he told Dobson in that interview, he just asked him, he said, how does somebody, you know, some little innocent child grow up and become what you've become. And he talked about the role of pornography. He talked about how that, you watch those images and then suddenly that doesn't stimulate you like it used to, and so you go deeper and deeper, and then after a while, just the images don't do it. Now you go out and take those twisted ideas that you've developed, and then you put that into practice in life. Not every person that's troubled with pornography is going to wind up being a serial killer or a rapist. That's not the point. But the point is, that's how it twists the mind. And that's why you got to look at it like a live rattlesnake. You cannot play and toy with it, because it ultimately will destroy us. This chart's too small to see, and I'm not going to go into detail anyway. But one note, it talks about the same thing we've talked about here, but one note that I do appreciate is, if you get around to point 6, this particular chart offers this note of hope. The good news is that if porn pathways aren't reinforced, they'll eventually disappear. As any addiction, the addiction to porn can be overcome. And I do like to make that point. It may be a long road back for some, depends on how far we're gone. But it is possible for us, just like a person who was brought up in a home where they were never taught the rules of modesty. They just grew up running around naked their whole life, and then they learn the gospel and they see how incongruous that is. They can learn and regain a bashful spirit. Doesn't happen overnight. Doesn't happen accidentally. I think there's always hope, but my point is preventative. Do not toy with this behavior. A godly relationship is built on purity, on finding that one and being that one for the one in whom my soul delights. This is a quote from Bob Walden when he was writing in our books on the song, and I'll offer this. Let us learn a very important lesson from this little book, he writes. Love can be pure and chaste. It can be steadfast and loyal. It can withstand the lures of riches and pomp and not be willing to sell itself to the highest bidder. It can see the beauty of true love from a humble person. Something else that I think the song teaches us. It teaches us that our love, our romantic love, the love between a man and woman, is, in a sense, a type of our relationship with God. Now, I've been saying all along, I don't think this book is a strict allegory, and I don't. Many do and have through the years. I think this book has something to say about our relationship as human beings. But I agree with E.J. Young. Edward J. Young was a famous commentator and scholar, wrote some good books. In his introduction to the Old Testament, writing about this book, he made this point. It certainly does teach us purity and sanctity in marriage. And as long as the world stands, we're going to need this Song of Songs. True. But then he goes on to say, that doesn't exhaust the purpose of the book. It doesn't just speak about the purity of human love. It reminds us of a love that is purer than our own. It reminds us that God, who has placed love in the human heart, is himself pure. I believe he's exactly right. We can learn something about our relationship with God through the marriage as God has set it up. One thing we learn about both relationships, one from the other, is to be what it ought to be, it has to be an exclusive relationship. That's true about the beloved and the Shulamite. It's also true about our relationship with God. Remember when the devil tried to tempt Jesus and said, why don't you just fall down and worship me? And the Lord's response was, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. That's about like Joseph, isn't it? Telling Potiphar's wife, you don't belong to me, you belong to somebody else. We need to remember that in our daily life. As the devil, and he surely does, will try to lure us away and steer us in the wrong direction. I am my beloved. That's as true in that relationship as any. I mentioned something else that I think fits as a parallel. That happiness and fulfillment can only be sought by the wisdom of God. Again, there are folks like Solomon who had so much power, so many opportunities, and thought surely collecting all these wives will be a great blessing. It was the greatest curse of his life. You know, we don't have to do it God's way, but we don't have to be happy either. But being who we ought to be and following God's way is the best opportunity we have to find the joy God intends. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 24, the commandments of the Lord are for our good always. I love what Ecclesiastes 7:29 says. This alone I have discovered. And since I think it was Solomon writing this, I think he discovered it the hard way and tells me so I don't have to. God made humanity upright, but they have sought out many evil schemes. There are plenty of them. Another way in which I think the marriage relationship, as it's outlined in the song, fits with the relationship with God has to do with the fact that our beloved should be our meditation day and night, day and night. That's one thing we read in the song. Even when they were apart, the Shulamite could still hear his voice, just like he was there. She was dreaming about him, thinking about him when she was separated from him. And, of course, leaning on him when they were together. That's true about our relationship with God. Don't you love Psalm 1? Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. He doesn't stand in the way of sinners. He doesn't sit in the seat of the scornful. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. When I think about that Shulamite, I don't care how many folks around her were trying to tell her, you need to give up on that guy. You have a great opportunity here. You need to make this. She would say to them, I don't want you to tip me that way. I don't want you to stir love till it please. But one thing they could never do, they couldn't stop her from thinking about her beloved. And I tell you, that's true about us. Not everybody has an ideal situation. There are some women who are married to a man that does not share the faith of Christ. There are some men who might not have a wife that does not share the faith. There may be children growing up in a household that's not spiritual. There may be people who work in an environment that is not helpful. But they can't make me think about anything that's ungodly. They can tip, they can yell, they can do what they do, but they can't make me forget God. I can take the Lord with me in those situations, difficult though they may be. The Shulamite was in a difficult situation, but her beloved was never far from her heart. That's a lesson for me. Nobody can prevent me from communion with the beloved. I'll tell you something else that I think is a parallel. It's just natural for us, if we do love, to defend and praise our beloved, no matter where we are. Never a bad word from the Shulamite about her beloved, though there have been some who've been glad to have heard something like that. What's your beloved more than another? That's what those around her asked. She said, well, let me tell you. He didn't have a lot of friends at that time in the crowd, but her loyalty was never wavering. That's the way it ought to be with me and the Lord. When this Psalm of David was written from the wilderness of Judea, Psalm 63, O Lord, thou art my God. Early will I seek thee. My soul thirsts for thee. My flesh longs for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power, thy glory. David was in a dry land, but his heart was never far from God. He couldn't see him, but he knew he was near. That's the kind of relationship we want with God. And let me just suggest this. The passion that we see between the Shulamite and her beloved is the same kind of spirit I need to have with my God. Deuteronomy 6. This is such a fundamental point of the law. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. Not just serve him, not just acknowledge him, love him. Love him. I thought this was a good point, and it made me think. Cambridge Bible is not always the most conservative view, but they made this point that in truth, the gravest defect of modern conventional Christianity is that it has in it far less of the passionate love for God that it ought to have. Passion in our devotion to God. Love more personal and absorbing than the highest earthly love ought to be a constant element in man's relationship to God. It's a fundamental question. Do you love God? I didn't say you're here tonight. Obviously you are. I'm glad you are. I didn't ask if you've been baptized in the past. You need to be baptized. I'm asking, do you love God? What is my relationship with God? Really? How deep is the passion I have for Jesus? True love is willing to sacrifice. That was true about our couple. I think it's true about us and our relationship to God. It's a trick question, isn't it? You're teaching Genesis and you ask the students, you remember the story of Jacob and Rachel and Laban. And you ask, how many years did Jacob serve for Rachel? And likely we'll be tempted to say 7 years. 7 years for Leah, 7 years for... Wrong. He served 14 years for Rachel, didn't he? He didn't serve a minute for Leah. She was thrown in. I love Leah. I always have. I love her because she put up with so much and she had it hard. We admire her in many ways. But the point that I want to make is not so much that, but as this next statement. He served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love that he had for her. It wasn't hard. Where was it? What were we talking about? About the commitment. I was talking with somebody just recently about the commitment to serve God and how that it is a commitment, but it's not a drudgery. What was it that John wrote? It's not burdensome. His commandments are not burdensome. Every time I read that verse, I think about something that I think it was Bill Hall, a point he made years ago about that. And he made this illustration. He said, you know, if you were trying to talk to somebody from another country and ask them, or they asked you, what do you have to do to be a football fan? Everybody's crazy about football around here. And you'd say, well, one thing that you might want to do is you might want to, in picking your team, you might want to learn all their players. How many players are there? About 100. Wow, that's a lot. And you want to learn something about the rules of football. There are a lot of rules, so rules that thick. And you want to learn about the history of their coach and the history of their program. How long have they been playing football? 100 years. Wow, that's a lot to know. And you want to know their schedule and the conference they play in, and you want to know this and that and something else. And he might say, that sounds like a lot of work. And the fan will say, oh, you'll love it. He does love it. It is work, but he loves it. He loves it. We don't look at what God asks of us lightly, but we also don't look at it as drudgery. Why? Because we love God. That's 1 John 5:3. His commandments are not burdensome. You ever think about that when somebody comes up and asks you a question like this? Do I have to attend all the services? Where's that fit into our picture? You don't have to attend any of them, as far as I know. You can miss every one of them. There are a lot of people around that miss them. But the question is, why would you choose that? Why would I choose to not be here? Why is it that there are people who have been baptized into Christ and talk about going to heaven for whom this assembly right here is just not a priority? And it may not be, God knows, it may not be they couldn't be here. They just don't choose to be here. Why is that? If that's me, that's the question I need to ask. Not, do I have to go? But why would I not want to go? I'll tell you one reason why I wouldn't want to go. I just don't love the Lord that much. If he was sitting right over there tonight, if he came back in the flesh and sat over there, you think folks would find a way here? But his word, his work, well, the preacher's boring. Okay, I'll grant you that one. But they might be more interesting somewhere else. They're not anywhere. Maybe it's not the preacher's fault. Maybe it's just our love is burning pretty low. I tell you about these two people we've been reading about, this Shulamite and her beloved. They were crazy about each other. And they couldn't wait to be together. That's the kind of love we ought to have toward the Lord and his work, whatever it might be, the assembly or whatever else it might be. Because we love him. And let me mention a couple of things quickly, and our time is up. But in this parallel, I think the patient faith in dark times is also powerful. We can read about these two lovers and how they were separated, but they were looking forward to that day when the shadows fled away and when they could be together again. There were dark times. Isn't that what David wrote about in that 23rd Psalm? I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but you're with me. You're with me. And in the dark times, and the difficult times, and every person I'm talking to tonight, if you're of any age, has faced those times. And if we live for a while, we're going to face them again. But that doesn't destroy our relationship, because it's not just a sunshine relationship. It's there for all ages, for all times. That's why you hang on, because there's something real about this. It's not just for the good times. And it has to be a free will. And we'll close with this point. That's the way God designed it. If you haven't read it, you've probably heard of a book that C.S. Lewis, I've heard enough preachers quote it. Mr. Lewis wrote years ago, he called it the Screw Tape Letters. That's a funny name. But it's really a little sort of a humorous way of making some serious points. He pictures temptation from the standpoint of two devils, a chief devil and his nephew devil. And they're talking about how to tempt men and about how God works to try to help men. And at one point in the book, the junior devil is sort of wondering about, why doesn't God just come and show himself? Why doesn't he just come and overwhelm everything? His presence, would certainly do that. It would light up every corner. And the senior devil said, yeah, see, that's the trick. God does not want to compel us. He wants us to come on our own free will. Otherwise, it's all ruined. The way he puts it in the book is, he cannot ravish, he can only woo. Sort of old language there, but you get the point. He doesn't want to force us. He invites us, and he wants us to come to him on our own will. And that's it. It has to be from free will. It was with these two, the Shulamite and the beloved. And so it is with us. Don't you think about that in reference to Revelation 3 and verse 20? The question Mr. Lewis wrote years later is one that you might have thought about when you read Revelation 3:20, the end of the letter to the church at Laodicea. The Lord makes this point. I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come to him and will sup with him and he with me. Why don't you just break the door down, grab them by the head, bring them? That's just not the way it works. He doesn't want robots forced to say and do. He wants you, and he wants me, for whatever reason. He loves us enough to give us the choice and invite us and do all that can be done outside of forcing. Come to me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. One of the most frustrating things that we find as Christians, not just as teachers or as shepherds, but as Christians, is that you see people making the bad choices. And you can do a lot of things, or try, but you cannot make me do right. I hope you pray for me. I hope you talk to me. I hope you care about me. But you can't make me do right. And I can't make somebody else do right. That's an individual choice, and it has to come ultimately from my will by God's grace. So when all the books are open, we're certainly going to have to answer for how we treat one another. But I will answer for what I've done with my soul, and so will you. Make a good choice now. Make a good choice now. We can, and I pray, God, that we all will. I appreciate your kind attention, and I appreciate your interest, and I hope that this book has blessed you. It's certainly a blessing to me, and I hope I can put these lessons into practice. We're going to sing a song in just a moment that asks the question, what can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. If you've not had that blood applied to you, why not tonight come be baptized into the death of Christ, be baptized for remission of sins, raised to walk in newness of life. Come believing, confess Jesus' name, and enter Christ tonight. If you're here as one who is a child of God, has not been faithful, and you know that, the Lord certainly knows it, make it right with Him. Don't wait. If there's anything we can do to assist you, we hope you'll let us know how right now while we stand and sing.